When Lincoln became president, he declared that it was impractical for the U.S. to separate, as it was physically inseparable. Despite this, there was still tons of controversy over issues like national debt and the dividing of jointly held federal territories that would separate the North and the South over these issues and encourage secession for the South. There was a fear that a divided America would allow European powers to expand into the Americas and defy the Monroe Doctrine. The border states had become a crucial area for the North. If the North wanted to keep these states on its side, it would need to give them the idea that it was fighting to preserve the Union and not to end slavery. This was mainly due to the fact that there were many pro-slavery sympathizers in the North, and in order to keep them on the side of the Union, they did not mention ending slavery. Essentially, the war began not to end slavery, but to preserve the Union. As Southern states seceded from the Union, they took important property and arsenals. When Lincoln took office, there were two important forts in the South, the most important being Fort Sumter. Lincoln feared that with no supplies, the fort would be forced to surrender, and thus sent a naval force which would see a strong reaction from the South as provocation. The South would attack and seize the fort, and several of the other states in the South would secede from the Union. Lincoln now had the excuse to declare total war against the South. As the war erupted, the South's chance of winning was seen as more likely. This was because it was fighting defensively on its home front and was more militarily prepared than the North. However, the North had a greater economic advantage, and with dominance of the sea, were able to block supplies to the South, thus draining their resources, which eventually resulted in their defeat, because they had begun to starve. The South needed a foreign power to help it win the war against the North. The South had hoped that Britain would intervene on its behalf, since it relied on its cotton, and the North had imposed a blockade preventing it from reaching Britain. However, Britain had a surplus of cotton in the beginning of the war, and the common folk were against intervening in the American Civil War. Thus, the South was unable to get the foreign support they needed and were left to fight the North alone. Another Anglo-American crisis erupted after Laird Arms, which were two Confederate warships in Britain that were going to be sent to the South, which meant that the Union Navy would get devastated. Britain ended up buying them, avoiding a war with the North, which threatened to invade Canada. Napoleon of France, attempting to take advantage of the disunity in America, invaded Mexico, thus defying the Monroe Doctrine. Although Britain was neutral during the war, there were several occasions where they almost went to war with the North. One occasion was the Trent Affair, when a Union warship stopped a British steamer and forcefully removed two Confederate diplomats. This angered the British, which prepared for war, but slow communications eased tensions, and the crisis was resolved, as Lincoln couldn't afford to go to war with Britain and the South. The Confederate government was weak, adopting the faults of the original Constitution. The North's government was more experienced and financially stable. As the war broke out, Lincoln had made some questionable acts, such as banning rid of habeas corpus so that anti-unionists might be arrested. He also passed a conscription law due to the lack of volunteers, which led to controversy in the New York draft riots. The North had been much more wealthier than the South was during the war. The North had passed the Morrill Tariff Act, suspending the low tariff and protecting the manufacturers. The North would continue to enjoy economic prosperity during the war, while the South's Cotton Kingdom was crippled, and the South was left with almost nothing by the end of the war.
Hello, it's the North. I was wondering, after all these problems you'd like to meet, to go over slavery. They say that time's supposed to heal you, but you're threatening to secede. South, can you hear me? I'm in Northern Territories, dreaming of who we used to be when we were united and free. I've forgotten how it felt before you started to secede. There's such a difference between us and a million cotton fields. Say hello from the free side. I must have compromised 1,000 times to tell you you are wrong, but when I told you, you never gave up. Hello from the northern side. I must have stopped you 1,000 times to tell you slavery is wrong, but it don't matter. It clearly doesn't affect your heart. South, how are you? What is wrong with me in saying slavery is wrong? I know that you are hurting economically. Did you ever make it out of your cotton times? And it seems never that both of us are declining. So hello from the free side. I must have compromised 1,000 times to tell you that slavery is wrong.